When the snowstorm hit the mountain town of Ashford Ridge, no one imagined a 7-year-old girl would vanish into the frozen forest that night. No one imagined a young German shepherd would step into the storm and refuse to leave her side. What happened next would change 3 lives forever and remind an entire town that miracles sometimes arrive on 4 trembling legs. This is not just a rescue story. This is a story about loyalty stronger than fear and love that refuse to freeze. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from today and leave a comment below. Your city, your state, your country. And as you listen, ask yourself, what would you do if hope was the only thing standing between life and the storm? Ashford Ridge, Montana sat like a small lantern at the edge of a much larger darkness. A mountain town built from pine, stubbornness, and the kind of silence that only winter can afford. On nights like this, the streets looked erased, as if the world had decided the town was a mistake and tried to wipe it clean with wind and white. Snow drove sideways, not falling so much as charging, whipped into sheets by gusts that rattled porch rails and made the old streetlights tremble like nervous saints. The air had that particular bite, the kind that burns before it numbs, and every breath felt like it had to be earned. At 22:17, when most sensible people in Ashford Ridge had already surrendered to blankets and prayer, a police cruiser crawled along Route 9 with its wipers fighting a losing war against ice, and its driver stared into the storm the way a man stares into a memory he cannot forgive. Officer Nathan Cole was 37, built tall and broad from years of hauling gear, shoveling driveways for neighbors who swore they could do it themselves, and carrying the quiet weight of things he never spoke about. His skin was pale under the dashboard glow, his jaw rough with stubble that always seemed to return 5 minutes after he shaved, and a faint scar ran over his right eyebrow like a thin, white lightning bolt. It had been there since the avalanche 3 winters ago, the one that took his wife and child and left him alive in a way that felt like a clerical error. That event didn't just change his face, it changed the way he moved through the world. He walked as if he was always bracing for impact. He spoke kindly but sparingly, as though words were a limited resource that winter might confiscate. Around other people, Nathan had a steady calm that made them feel safer, but inside he carried a kind of restless guilt, the sort that sits in a man's chest and clears its throat when the room gets too quiet. He wore the department's winter uniform, dark navy coat thick enough to stop a knife of wind, insulated pants, snow boots with salt crusting the seams, and black gloves that made his hands look like they belonged to someone else. His eyes were the color of cold river stones, and tonight they stayed fixed on the road that was barely there. The radio crackled, that familiar burst of electricity and urgency, and the dispatcher's voice cut through the storm like a match struck in a cave. Lila Marrow, the night dispatcher, wasn't much older than 25, with a quick mouth, a warm laugh she used like a weapon against panic, and the kind of focus that could make a room fall in line. People said she'd been a dance kid once, all bright costumes and competitive smiles, until a drunk driver took her older brother and left the family stitched together with grief and stubborn humor. That loss sharpened her. It made her listen to every call like it was personal. "Unit 1, you copy?" she asked, her words clipped but steady. Nathan pressed the transmit button. "Cole, I'm here. We've got a missing child," Lila said, and Nathan felt the world tilt a fraction, as if the storm itself had paused to listen. 7-year-old female, name's Emily Hart, last seen about 30 minutes ago near Blackstone Lake trailhead. Mom called it in. They were driving back from her aunt's, slid off the shoulder. Mom says she tried to keep Emily inside the car, but the kid panicked, ran when the wind hit, and disappeared into the tree line. The mother's still at the vehicle location, but she's shaken up. Power lines are down around Morgan Street, and the county says they can't get a plow up there for at least an hour. Nathan's grip tightened on the wheel. In his mind, he saw small footprints filling with snow, saw a child's thin jacket turning into a myth too quickly. "Any other units?" he asked. "Sheriff's office is sending Deputy Rourke. Search and rescue is mobilizing at the fire station," Lila replied. "But Nathan, this weather—" "Yeah," he said, and didn't need to finish the sentence. In weather like this, time didn't pass. It vanished. He turned off the main road and into a narrower route that climbed toward Blackstone Lake, the cruiser's tires crunching through fresh drifts that felt eager to swallow him. Houses fell away, replaced by black pines and the skeletal shapes of aspens, their branches clawing at the sky like they wanted to drag the storm down and wrestle it. As he drove, Nathan's mind kept supplying unwanted images, and he fought them the way he fought the ice on his windshield, steadily, grimly, one scrape at a time. In the back of his memory, the avalanche existed like an old god, patient and merciless, and he had learned that winter didn't always roar when it took something. Sometimes it took in silence. He reached the trailhead parking area and saw the vehicle. A dark SUV angled wrong, hazard lights blinking like a distress signal to anyone who still believed in mercy. A woman stood near it, hunched against the wind, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her insides in. Sarah Hart was in her early 30s, slender but not fragile, her figure more wiry than thin, the kind of body that had learned endurance from juggling work, parenting, and too many sleepless nights. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, freckles scattered across her nose like the last stubborn stars of summer, and her hair brown and long had been pulled into a messy bun that the wind kept threatening to undo. Her eyes were wide, bright with terror and guilt, the way eyes look when someone is replaying a moment and trying to rewrite it. She wasn't dramatic, she didn't wail. She stood there shaking, jaw clenched, as if she believed that if she fell apart, the storm would win. Nathan stepped out, the wind punching him immediately, and he walked toward her with his shoulders squared. Sarah turned at the sound of his boots and rushed forward 2 steps, then stopped like she'd hit an invisible wall. "Officer," she started, voice cracking. "I'm here," Nathan said, and his tone was steady enough to borrow strength from. "Tell me exactly what happened." Sarah tried, words tumbling. The car slid. She reached for Emily. Emily screamed. The door opened, wind like a monster, a small shape darting into the trees. "I followed for a second," Sarah said, "but I couldn't see. She swallowed hard, and Nathan recognized that helpless, choking shame. It was an emotion Winter specialized in. He placed a gloved hand lightly on her shoulder, not to restrain, but to anchor. "You did the right thing calling," he said. "Stay here. Keep the hazards on. I need you visible for the teams coming in." Sarah nodded too quickly, as if compliance might earn her daughter back. Nathan stepped away, radioed his location, and took a high-powered flashlight from his cruiser. His breath came out in thick plumes that the wind tore apart. He checked his belt. Radio, spare batteries, emergency blanket, and a small thermos of coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago. He thought of the coffee with a flash of grim humor. Even the coffee had given up tonight. Then he stepped past the edge of the parking lot and into the tree line. The forest swallowed sound, but not the storm. Wind threaded through branches, making them creak and snap like old bones. Snow slapped his face, filled his collar, found every gap in his clothing like it had been invited. Nathan moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned the hard way what panic cost. He called out, not too loudly, not wasting air. "Emily, it's Officer Cole. You hear me, sweetheart?" The only answer was the storm's relentless hiss. He scanned the ground for footprints, for a glove, for anything that said a child had been here and was still somehow moving. The snow fell so fast it tried to erase evidence in minutes. Twice he thought he saw a mark, only to realize it was a shadow from his own boot. He pushed deeper, using the compass app on his phone and landmarks he knew from patrol. A boulder shaped like a crouching bear, a split pine that locals called the Devil's Wishbone. His boots sank to mid-calf, and every step was labor. He kept imagining a small body losing heat, the way life could leak away so quietly. He kept imagining Sarah's face when he came back with nothing. He hated that image. He walked faster anyway. After what felt like a lifetime, he heard something that wasn't wind. A soft sound, half swallowed, like a whimper swallowed by a throat too tired to make it. Nathan froze, listening. Another sound followed, not a cry, but a thin, strained breath. He angled the flashlight beam between trees and caught a flicker of movement ahead, low to the ground. "Emily?" he called again, and his voice sounded small against the vastness. He advanced carefully, pushing through a curtain of snow-laden branches that dumped cold powder down the back of his neck. His light swept over uneven ground, fallen limbs, and then there. A small shape stood in the storm like a stubborn candle that refused to go out. It was a German Shepherd, but not the full-grown kind you see in calendars and police K9 posters. This one was about 8 months old, still adolescent, with legs that had grown faster than confidence, and a frame that looked lean from hunger or hardship. Its coat was black and tan, but the colors were muted under a crust of ice. Snow clung to its whiskers and gathered along its back. Its ears were upright but trembling, and its breath came out in frantic puffs. The dog's eyes locked onto Nathan's beam, amber and fierce, and in that gaze there was something older than puppyhood, something like a vow. The dog did not bark. It did not retreat. It held its ground. Nathan's flashlight moved lower, and his stomach tightened. Behind the dog, sheltered by its body and the curve of a fallen tree, lay a child. Emily Hart, small and curled, her jacket dusted white, her hair stuck to her cheeks. Her face was pale, lips tinted blue, and the rise and fall of her chest was shallow, but it was there. She was alive, balanced on the knife edge between warmth and the cold's final claim. The dog stood with its body angled to block the wind, paws planted as if the earth itself had appointed it guardian. It glanced back at Emily once, just once, then looked at Nathan again, as if measuring him, judging whether this large, strange creature could be trusted with what it had kept safe. Nathan lowered himself slowly to one knee, ignoring the sting as snow soaked through his pants. He raised his free hand, palm open, and spoke in a voice that belonged to someone gentler than the storm. "Hey," he whispered. "You did good. I see you." The dog's tail did not wag, it did not soften, but it didn't lunge either. It stayed there, trembling, shielding, enduring, like a small myth carved out of loyalty and desperation. And in that moment, with the wind screaming around them, Nathan understood something that hit harder than the cold. Winter could bury roads, topple power lines, and steal names from the living, but it had not managed to bury this bond. Not tonight. Not here. He inched closer, breath controlled, eyes never leaving the dog's. "I'm going to help her," he said. The dog's ears flicked, and the storm swallowed the rest of the world as if this clearing had become its own sacred arena. Nathan leaned forward, his heart hammering, and the chapter ended on that suspended second man, child, and guardian puppy, held together under a white sky that tried and failed to make them disappear. The wind did not slow. If anything, it seemed offended by the sight of something still standing. Snow continued to sweep through the forest in violent sheets, striking the trees and the small clearing where Nathan, the German shepherd, and Emily were suspended in a moment too fragile for time. Nathan could feel the cold already burning through the layers of his uniform, the kind of cold that worked fast and cruel, but the dog in front of him had been here far longer. The animal's frame trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and exposure. Its black and tan coat was stiff with ice, the fur around its muzzle frosted white, and yet its stance remained fixed, paws planted like iron stakes in frozen ground. Nathan remained on one knee, his flashlight lowered so the beam would not threaten the animal's eyes. The forest was no longer simply a forest. It was a living thing of wind and shadow, howling with ancient impatience. In the distance he could hear the storm ripping across the open lake, the sound of it carrying through the trees like the roar of a distant ocean. "Easy," Nathan said, his voice calm, slow, carefully measured. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." The dog's eyes stayed on him, amber, alert, too aware for something so young. Nathan could tell by the build of the animal, its long legs, still slightly awkward at the joints, the way its chest had not yet filled out, that it was no more than 8 or 9 months old. A juvenile, barely past puppyhood, but already carrying itself like a soldier at the gate. Behind the dog, Emily's body lay curled against the trunk of the fallen tree. Her jacket, pale blue and much too thin for this weather, was coated in snow. Her small hands were pulled tight against her chest. Her breathing came in faint, shallow puffs that fogged the air for a second and vanished. Each breath looked like a victory. Nathan slid his free hand inside his coat and pulled out the emergency blanket, its silver surface catching the flashlight's glow. The crinkle of the material made the dog flinch, its ears twitching. "It's okay," Nathan whispered. "It's just warmth." The wind shoved at his back as if trying to knock him forward, trying to hurry the ending. Nathan fought it, planting his boot deeper into the drift. He leaned closer, careful not to cross the invisible line the dog had drawn in the snow. "I'm going to take her," he said, not as a command, but as a promise. "I won't leave you." The dog did not move. For a long moment, nothing happened except the storm. Then the dog's gaze flicked back to Emily, and Nathan saw something change in its posture. The rigid line of its shoulders softened just a fraction. It did not step aside, but it did not growl either. It held its position, as if giving Nathan a single fragile second of permission. Nathan reached forward. The instant his gloved hands touched Emily's jacket, the dog stiffened. A low sound rumbled in its chest, not a threat, but a warning shaped from fear and loyalty. "I know," Nathan murmured. "I know." He moved slowly, sliding one arm under Emily's shoulders, the other beneath her knees. Her body was frighteningly light. Her hair was wet with melting snow, strands frozen together at the tips. Her skin was cold through the fabric of her coat, far colder than it should have been. The dog stayed pressed against her side, refusing to retreat even as Nathan lifted. Only when Nathan gathered both Emily and the dog into his arms together did the animal finally release its stance. Its legs wobbled, the strength draining out of them all at once. The dog collapsed partly against Nathan's chest, its head dropping into the crook of his arm, breath shuddering. Nathan wrapped the emergency blanket around all three of them, the silver crinkling loudly in the wind. The storm tried to tear it away. He held tighter. "Good," he whispered. "You did good." The dog's eyes fluttered but stayed open, fixed on Emily's face. Nathan's radio crackled against his chest. He reached up with his shoulder, pressed the transmit button. "Cole to command," he said, his voice cutting through the wind. "I have visual. Found the child. She's alive. Severe hypothermia. I am with her now. Also have a juvenile German Shepherd with us. Need immediate medical extraction at my location. Coordinates sending." The response came through in a burst of static and urgency. Search and rescue acknowledged. EMS was already moving. Nathan adjusted his grip and began the slow, brutal walk back toward the trailhead. Each step felt like wading through cement. The wind shoved him sideways. The trees groaned, but he did not stop. Emily made a faint sound in her throat, something between a cough and a whimper. The dog's head lifted at once, its nose brushing her cheek, as if checking her breath, reaffirming her existence. "You're still with us, kid," Nathan said. "Stay that way." After what felt like hours, though it was barely minutes, flashing lights pierced the forest. The shapes of people appeared through the white. Deputy Rourke, a heavy-set man in his 40s with a thick mustache and the steady presence of someone who had seen too many bad nights. 2 search and rescue volunteers, faces hidden behind frost-covered masks, and an EMS crew hauling a sled. They moved fast and precise. Emily was placed onto a thermal mat, wrapped in heated blankets, oxygen mask fitted over her face. A paramedic named Chloe Reyes Small, sharp-eyed, her dark hair braided tightly under her helmet, checked Emily's pulse, then her pupils. "She's breathing," Chloe said. "Pulse is slow, but it's there. We need to get her inside, now." The dog tried to follow, stumbling forward. "Hey," Nathan said, tightening his hold. "Easy." Chloe looked at the animal. "He's been with her?" "Shielding her," Nathan replied. Chloe nodded once. "Bring him." They did not separate them. The sled moved quickly down the path, pulled by the rescue team. Nathan stayed beside Emily, his hand resting on the dog's shoulder. The animal pressed itself against Emily's side, its body a fragile wall against the cold. By the time they reached the waiting ambulance, the storm was screaming harder, furious at being denied. The doors slammed. Heat rushed over them. Emily's temperature registered at 33 degrees Celsius. Hypothermia, moderate to severe. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency. Warm IV fluids, oxygen, continuous monitoring. Nathan stood at the foot of the stretcher, his coat unzipped, the emergency blanket still wrapped around the dog and Emily both. The dog's eyes stayed on Emily, never leaving her face. Nathan realized in that moment that whatever this animal was, it had already chosen its family. The ambulance tore through the night toward Ashford Ridge Medical Center, the siren carving a thin red wound through the storm. And for the first time in years, Nathan felt the cold losing its grip. Ashford Ridge Medical Center was a low, square building crouched at the edge of town like it had learned long ago not to challenge winter. Snow battered its windows in furious gusts, and the parking lot lights flickered as if the storm were trying to negotiate with the power grid. The ambulance doors burst open, and a wave of heat rolled out to meet the cold that clung to Nathan's coat, to Emily's clothes, to the trembling body of the German Shepherd still pressed against her side. Inside, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, of warm air and human persistence. The triage nurse, Megan Loring, a woman in her early 40s with silver-streaked hair and the calm face of someone who had spent 2 decades in emergency rooms, met them at the door. Her posture was straight, her movements efficient, and the kind of steadiness she carried had been forged in storms like this one. She took one look at Emily's blue lips and the frost clinging to the dog's fur and snapped into motion. "Room 2, hypothermia protocol," she ordered, and the team flowed around her. Emily was transferred to a heated gurney. The dog tried to follow, slipping on the tile, his legs weak from cold and exhaustion. Nathan caught him, lifting the animal without thinking, surprised again by how light he was. The fur under Nathan's gloves was soaked and stiff, the skin beneath radiating a desperate chill. The dog's head sagged against Nathan's shoulder, but his eyes never closed. In the treatment room, monitors came alive with quiet beeping. Warmed IV fluids were started. A heated blanket was layered over Emily, then another. Oxygen was secured around her face, the clear mask fogging with each shallow breath. The room filled with motion and low voices. Dr. Harold Winfield, the attending physician on duty, entered moments later. He was in his late 50s, tall and narrow, his posture slightly stooped from decades of leaning over beds, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice that rarely rose but always carried. Years earlier, he had lost his own daughter to leukemia, and since then his compassion had sharpened into something almost surgical. He scanned Emily's chart, then her face, then the dog. "She alive?" he asked. "Yes," Megan replied. "Temp 33 Celsius, pulse slow but steady." Winfield nodded. "Keep active rewarming, continuous monitoring. Let me know if she drops another degree." The dog shifted in Nathan's arms, trying to get closer to Emily. "He's been shielding her," Nathan said quietly. "Wouldn't leave her." Winfield studied the animal for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Let him stay," he said. "He's warmer than any machine." Nathan set the dog down beside the bed, the emergency blanket still wrapped around both of them. The dog immediately pressed his body against Emily's side, his nose resting against her hand, his breathing shallow but determined. "Good boy," Megan murmured as she adjusted the IV line. "You're doing great." They needed a name for the chart. Nathan hesitated, then said, "Call him Atlas." "Atlas," Megan repeated, typing it in. "Strong shoulders." Hours passed like slow footsteps in a hallway that never ended. Nathan sat in the corner chair, his coat draped over his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. He watched the monitors. He watched Emily's chest rise and fall. He watched Atlas shift closer every time her breathing faltered, as if the dog could feel the change before the machines. At 1:48 a.m., Emily's temperature stabilized. At 2:37, her pulse strengthened. At 3:11, her eyelids fluttered. Nathan leaned forward without realizing he had moved. Emily's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, gray with confusion and cold. Then they found the dog's face inches from her own. Atlas lifted his head and made the softest sound, a whine that barely reached the room. Emily's lips trembled. "Atlas," she whispered, though she had never been told his name. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the mattress. Chloe Reyes, the paramedic who had ridden with them, stood in the doorway watching. Her face was pale with fatigue, her eyes red from wind and worry. She caught Nathan's gaze and gave him a small, stunned smile. "She's back," Chloe said. Dr. Winfield returned, checked Emily's pupils, listened to her lungs, and nodded once. "She's going to make it through the night," he said. "The next 24 hours are critical, but this is good." Nathan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the forest. Emily drifted in and out of sleep. Each time she stirred, Atlas moved with her, adjusting, anchoring. He drank a few sips of water from a syringe Megan offered, then went right back to Emily's side, refusing to lie anywhere else. By dawn, the storm outside had not stopped, but the world inside the room felt different, softer, less afraid. Sarah Hart arrived just after 7 a.m., her coat dusted white, her face hollow with terror and hope. She stopped in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth as she took in the sight of her daughter breathing under blankets, the dog curled protectively against her. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. Her legs nearly gave out. Nathan caught her elbow and guided her to the bed. Sarah knelt, her hands trembling as she brushed Emily's hair back from her face. "Baby," she said, her voice breaking open. "I'm here." Emily's eyes opened. "Mom," she murmured. Sarah collapsed forward, sobbing into the blanket, the kind of sobbing that empties a person of everything except love. Atlas lifted his head and licked Emily's fingers once, as if to say, I kept her for you." Sarah noticed him then. "Who?" she started. "Atlas," Nathan said. "He stayed with her in the storm." Sarah looked at the dog, really looked, and something in her expression shifted from terror to reverence. "Thank you," she whispered, and the word was for both Nathan and the animal. The day passed in small victories. Emily's color improved. Her temperature rose to safe levels. She drank warm broth and slept. Atlas slept too, finally, his body slack with exhaustion, his head resting against Emily's arm. Nathan did not leave the hospital. When night came again, and the storm finally began to lose its grip on Ashford Ridge, Nathan sat in the dim light of the hallway, staring at the closed door of Emily's room. He thought of his empty house. He thought of the avalanche. He thought of how close the world had come to taking another child. Inside, Atlas shifted in his sleep and pressed closer to Emily. Outside, Winter listened, and for once, Winter waited. Morning arrived in Ashford Ridge like an apology. The storm had finally loosened its grip, and pale winter sunlight crept across the hospital parking lot, turning last night's wreckage of snow into something almost gentle. The town itself looked exhausted, roofs bowed under white weight, branches snapped and scattered like forgotten bones. But the sky above had cleared into a blue so thin and fragile it felt as if it might break if anyone looked too hard. Inside Ashford Ridge Medical Center, time moved differently. Emily Hart slept beneath layers of warm blankets, her small chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. The monitors beside her bed had lost their frantic urgency. Now their soft beeping sounded almost like breathing. The oxygen mask was gone. Her cheeks, once ghostly pale, had begun to regain color, a faint blush returning to skin that had nearly surrendered to Winter's claim. Curled against her side was Atlas. The German shepherd, barely more than a youth, had finally collapsed into a deep, unmoving sleep. His body stretched awkwardly, long legs tucked beneath him, head resting against Emily's arm as if he feared the distance between them might grow if he did not anchor himself. His fur had dried into soft waves of black and tan. The ice melted away, but leaving behind the faint smell of snow and wind. One ear had flopped sideways, betraying the fact that for all his guardian's resolve, he was still young. Nathan Cole watched them from the chair by the window. He had not slept. He doubted he could. The hospital room was dim, curtains half drawn against the bright winter glare. Nathan sat with his coat folded neatly across his lap, his gloved hands resting atop it as if he were guarding something sacred. The events of the night replayed in fragments: the storm, the forest, the way Atlas had stood against the wind, the sound of Emily's first breath in the ambulance. For the first time in years, the avalanche did not dominate his thoughts. Something else had taken its place, quieter but stronger. At 9:30 a.m., the door opened softly. Dr. Harold Winfield stepped inside, carrying a clipboard and the faint smell of old coffee. He moved with the careful calm of a man who had learned that every room was a threshold between fear and hope. His gray hair was slightly rumpled from a long night, and deep lines marked the corners of his eyes, but when he looked at Emily, his expression softened. "She's stable," he said quietly. "Her core temperature is back within normal range. Lungs are clear. She'll remain under observation for at least another 48 hours, but the danger has passed." Nathan released a slow breath. "And the dog?" he asked. Winfield glanced at Atlas, still sleeping against Emily. "He's dehydrated, underweight, and exhausted, but remarkably healthy considering the conditions. He'll need monitoring. By protocol, animal control should hold him for 14 days while we attempt to locate an owner." Nathan nodded, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of separating them. Emily stirred, her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was the dog. "Atlas," she whispered. Atlas's tail thumped once. Nathan leaned forward. "Hey, kid," he said gently. Emily turned her head, blinking at him. "You're the man from the snow." "That's me." She thought for a moment, then said, "He didn't leave." "I know." She closed her eyes again, her small hand sliding unconsciously into Atlas's fur. At noon, Sarah Hart arrived with fresh clothes for Emily and a paper bag of food she never touched. Her face looked less shattered than the day before, but the shadow of fear still lingered in her eyes. She moved carefully around the room, as if afraid any sudden motion might wake the nightmare again. Sarah sat beside Emily, brushing her hair, whispering small, useless comforts that somehow mattered more than anything else. Then she turned to Nathan. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to." She glanced at Atlas. And him. Nathan followed her gaze. He did the hard part. Over the next few days, winter held its distance. Emily improved steadily. She drank soup. She laughed weakly when Sarah tried to make jokes. She asked endless questions about Atlas, where he came from, how old he was, whether he liked peanut butter, whether he could sleep in her bed. Atlas grew stronger too. He ate with quiet focus, drank until the bowl was empty, then returned to Emily's side as if pulled by an invisible thread. He followed her eyes, her movements, the rise and fall of her breath. Nurses began calling him the little officer. Nathan visited every morning and every night. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he brought nothing but himself. He found that the hospital no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a place where something was being repaired. On the 5th day, Emily was allowed to walk the hallway. Her legs were unsteady at first, but Atlas matched her pace, staying so close his shoulder brushed her knee. When she tired, he sat. When she laughed, he wagged. Staff stopped to watch. Chloe Reyes passed them near the nurses' station. "You two are something," she said, shaking her head. Emily smiled. "He's my hero." That afternoon, Dr. Winfield met with Nathan and Sarah. "Emily will be discharged tomorrow," he said. "Full recovery is expected." Sarah's shoulders sagged in relief. "And Atlas?" Nathan asked. Winfield hesitated. "Animal control will transfer him to the county shelter for the hold period. Unless an owner comes forward, he'll be eligible for adoption in 2 weeks. Emily's eyes widened. "He has to stay with me." Sarah's lips trembled. "He saved her," she said. "We won't forget that." Nathan said nothing, but something inside him had already begun to decide. That night, after visiting hours ended, Nathan remained in the quiet hallway outside Emily's room. He thought of his house on Maple Street, the empty bed, the silent kitchen, the dog bowls he had thrown away years ago after Max died. He thought of Atlas standing in the storm, and he realized the house did not have to stay empty forever. The morning Emily left the hospital, Ashford Ridge was almost unrecognizable. The storm that had nearly erased the town days before had retreated into memory, leaving behind a sky rinsed clean and bright as fresh glass. Snowbanks lined the streets like white walls of silence, and the mountains beyond the town stood calm, their jagged edges softened by sunlight. Winter still ruled the land, but its fury had passed, and what remained was the quiet after survival. Nathan arrived early. He parked beneath the maple tree across from the hospital entrance, its branches burdened with frost, and sat in his cruiser for a moment before getting out. He watched the front doors, coffee cooling in his hand, heart carrying a strange, careful hope. When they finally opened, Sarah Hart emerged with Emily bundled in a thick red coat, her small face framed by a knitted hat that slipped too low over her eyes. Atlas walked between them on a temporary leash, his ears high, tail moving slowly, every step alert and proud. Emily spotted Nathan and broke into a grin. "Officer Cole!" He crossed the lot in long strides and knelt so she could throw her arms around his neck. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let himself exist inside that warmth, the sound of her laughter, the steady presence of the dog pressed against his knee. "You look stronger," he said. "I am," Emily declared. Atlas barked once, a short, happy sound. Dr. Winfield stood near the doors, hands in his coat pockets, observing with the gentle satisfaction of someone who had watched a miracle unfold without needing to name it. "She's cleared," Winfield told Nathan. "Physically, emotionally, that's another road." Nathan nodded. "They'll walk it." Emily squeezed Atlas's fur. "We will." But the world outside the hospital was not finished testing them. By noon, word came from the sheriff's office. The search for Sarah Hart, who had been reported missing from the crash site after paramedics first transported Emily, had expanded. Sarah had suffered a head injury and wandered into the upper ridges before collapsing. Thermal imaging picked up faint heat signatures near the northern slopes of Blackstone Ridge. Search and rescue deployed helicopters, snowmobiles, ground teams. Nathan joined the perimeter unit. Emily stayed with Dr. Winfield and Sarah's sister, Rachel Moore, a tall, soft-spoken woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and a steady patience shaped by years of teaching second grade. Rachel had driven through the night from Helena when she heard the news, and she held Emily now as if she were made of glass. Atlas refused to leave Emily. Nathan hesitated. "He's part of her now," he told Winfield. Winfield nodded. "Then let him stay." The hours stretched thin. Snow glittered in the sun, harmless now, almost beautiful. It was hard to believe it had tried to kill them. At 3:17 p.m., the call came through. They had found Sarah, alive. She had been lying beneath an overhang of rock, one arm broken, body temperature dangerously low but stable. She was conscious when the medics reached her. Her first words had been Emily's name. Nathan drove back to the hospital faster than he should have, heart pounding. When Sarah was brought in, pale and trembling but alive, Emily ran to her. "Mom!" Sarah cried out and wrapped her arms around her daughter, pressing her face into Emily's hair, the sound that came from her throat a mixture of gratitude and grief. Atlas pushed forward, placing himself between them, tail wagging, eyes bright. Sarah reached down and touched his head. "You stayed," she whispered. "You stayed with her." The room fell silent. Later that evening, Sarah was stabilized. Emily curled beside her bed, Atlas between them like a living bridge. Winter finally let go of Ashford Ridge that night. Over the next week, life resumed its careful rhythm. Emily returned home with Rachel temporarily while Sarah recovered. Atlas was transferred to the county animal shelter for the mandatory 14-day hold. The shelter director, Margaret Sloan, a short woman with silver hair and a voice like warm gravel, assured Nathan that Atlas would receive special care. "He's a hero here already," Margaret said. Nathan visited every day. Atlas recognized him instantly, pressing his nose against the kennel bars, tail sweeping the floor. Nathan brought him food, toys, a blanket that smelled like Emily. 2 weeks later, no owner came forward. Nathan filled out the adoption papers. He signed his name with steady hands. Spring did not arrive all at once in Ashford Ridge. It came like a cautious apology. The mountains still wore their white crowns. The rivers still whispered of cold, but the town itself began to breathe again. Snow melted in narrow rivers along the sidewalks. Pine needles reappeared from beneath the drifts. Windows opened. People lingered outside longer. Life, slow and careful, resumed. Nathan Cole's house on Maple Street was no longer silent. Atlas filled it with movement. He was no longer the trembling figure from the storm. He grew taller, broader, his chest thickening, his paws heavy on the wooden floors. His eyes still carried that same fierce gentleness. He followed Nathan from room to room, slept beside the bed, waited by the door every evening at precisely 6:12 p.m. for the sound of the cruiser returning. And every Saturday, Emily came. Her hair was longer now, her laughter stronger. The winter had not stolen it from her. Atlas would hear her car before Nathan did. His ears would lift, his tail would thump once, then twice, then he would bolt for the door as if the house itself were chasing him. Emily always dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering, "You stayed. You always stay." 1 year after the storm, Ashford Ridge held its winter festival again. The square was strung with lights. Children skated. Fire pits burned. Steam rose from cups of cocoa. The town gathered as if for a ritual, remembering both the winter that nearly broke them and the small miracles that carried them through. At sunset, the mayor stepped onto the stage. Nathan stood near the back of the crowd with Atlas at his side. Emily and Sarah stood with Rachel near the front. The mayor's voice carried over the square. "This past winter, Ashford Ridge was tested, but tonight we honor the courage that answered that storm." He gestured for Nathan and Atlas. Nathan hesitated. Emily turned and waved frantically. He walked forward, Atlas moving beside him, steady, calm, unshaken by the noise. The mayor knelt and fastened a small medallion to Atlas's collar. Not a badge, not a ribbon. A simple engraved disc from the town council. For courage, for loyalty, for life. Applause rose like warmth. Emily ran onto the stage and hugged Nathan, then Atlas. She whispered into Atlas's fur, "The snow tried to bury us, but love refused." Nathan's eyes filled. That night, as the crowd faded and the fire pits burned low, Nathan walked Atlas through the quiet streets. Snow still lay in shadowed corners. The world was not free of winter. It never would be, but it had been changed. At home, Atlas curled at Nathan's feet. Nathan sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the mountains. For the first time in years, he did not feel the avalanche behind him. He felt something ahead. Sometimes God does not send a miracle the way we expect. Sometimes he sends it through a small trembling heart that refuses to give up. Through loyalty that stands in the storm. Through love that stays when everything else runs away. This story reminds us that no winter is stronger than the will God places inside a living soul. When the world grows cold and heavy and you feel forgotten, remember that God is still writing your rescue even when you cannot see it yet. In our daily lives, we all face storms, fear, loneliness, loss, doubt. But just like Emily and Atlas, when we choose to stay, when we choose to love, when we choose not to abandon each other, we become part of the miracle God is creating. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of faith, love, and second chances. May God bless every viewer who is listening right now. May He protect your family, your home, and your heart. If you believe in His miracles and His love, type Amen in the comments and let us pray together.